All right, so today we're diving into a really fascinating story, the evolution of social work in Hong Kong. We're going to track its journey from being this, powerful force for radical political change all the way to its modern-day reality. And it's a really compelling story about what happens when a profession that's literally built on advocacy is forced to reinvent itself just to survive.
And that really brings us to the core question here, doesn't it? What does happen when a profession that's all about social justice is suddenly told, hey, you need to ignore politics? Well, that's exactly the challenge we're going to explore by digging into the dramatic evolution of community work in Hong Kong.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to travel back in time. We're heading to what a lot of people call the golden age of social work in Hong Kong. And this was a time when community workers, well, they weren't just helpers. No, they were actual engines for political and social reform, a totally different world. So this whole era really kicked off back in the 1970s. You had social workers moving beyond just one-on-one casework and getting into some really bold community organizing. But the real game changer, that came in 1978, when the government actually started funding these things called neighborhood-level community development projects. Let's just call them NLCDPs. And here's the irony, right? This state support, it ended up fueling an even more confrontational, reform-minded approach that hit its peak in the 90s. So, what exactly were these NLCDPs? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because it's a fascinating contradiction. Even though these projects were funded by the state, their purpose was actually deeply radical. I mean, we're talking about empowering communities to really agitate for real structural change. And their goals were honestly incredibly ambitious. This wasn't just about providing services, it was about building power from the ground up. And I want you to look at that last point right there, motivating political participation. That wasn't just a side effect, it was an explicit core function of the job. The ultimate goal was social change. Period. But, well, that era didn't last. After the handover of sovereignty, everything started to change. A really profound shift happened, leading to what the source material for this explainer calls the great depoliticization of social work in Hong Kong. And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? It shows just how deep that change really was. You see the primary goals shifting from big picture social reform to just delivering service outputs. The funding model went from supporting activism to being all about output-driven metrics. And the role of the social worker, it went from being confrontational and proactive to, well, restricted and apolitical, a complete 180. But what does this shift actually feel like for the people on the ground, the ones doing the work? This quote really gets to the heart of it. Frontline social workers today, they often feel completely disempowered. They're basically caught between the original, passionate ideals of their profession and all these new restrictions from their own organizations. And just to be crystal clear, this isn't just some vague change in the atmosphere. Oh no, this is official policy. We're talking about new codes of conduct that actively pressure social workers to be apolitical, which, when you think about it, is basically asking them to ignore the entire political and social context of the problems their clients are facing. It's a huge ask. So this all begs a pretty critical question, right? What's the path forward? The answer isn't as simple as just trying to go back to the good old days. Instead, the source we're looking at proposes a really smart, modern adaptation. It's about reframing community work as something called macro practice. And this whole idea is anchored in a fundamental truth of the profession, something we can't forget. Social work, at its core, is and has always been about social change and justice. It is, like the source says, intrinsically political. If you deny that, you're pretty much denying its entire purpose. So macro practice doesn't throw away that radical element. It just reimagines it for a brand new era. So what exactly is macro practice? Well, think of it as an evolution in strategy. You're still aiming for that big systemic change, but you're going about it in a much smarter way. It means you have to deeply understand who holds the power, and this part is crucial. You have to build broad coalitions instead of trying to go it alone. And it's really built on three key foundations. First, workers have to develop what's called a critical consciousness, really acknowledging their own biases and understanding the political landscape. Second, they need to analyze that whole complex web of power, the relationships between the establishment, the media, all the interest groups. And third, and this is a big one, they have to shift from being solo activists to becoming facilitators of widespread collaboration. All of this leads to a completely new vision of what it means to be a change agent in today's world. It's not about being some lone hero anymore. It's about being an architect, someone who designs and builds a whole new collaborative ecosystem for justice. And take a look at who's in this ecosystem. It's pretty much everyone. You've got state-sponsored workers needing to connect with grassroots organizations, politicians, academics, even students. The source material is really clear on this point. That big macro-level change, it can only happen when all these different players start working together on joint initiatives.
Which really leaves us with one final, and I think pretty provocative question. See, the story of Hong Kong social workers, it isn't just about one place or one profession. It forces all of us to ask a much bigger question, one that applies just about everywhere. In our own complex, and let's face it, often restrictive world, what does it truly mean to be a change agent today?